We've got a lot to talk about. If you follow me on Reels and TikTok, I kind of snuck one in towards the end of 2022. What this basically was a first-hand glimpse of all the places I had planned to visit in 2023. Now that it's 2023, this planned trip is coming closer and closer, and things are becoming more serious. I'll just have to say one thing. What a voyage it's gonna be. Now, there are definitely general things I like to go over about this trip. My goals, my intentions in every place, and the whole significance and meaning and story behind this trip. Because man, it goes deep. This Grand Pacific Island voyage is going to take me across Polynesia, Melanesia, and more than likely even Micronesia. Making stops in American Samoa, Tokelau, Uve'an-Futuna, also known as Wallis and Futuna, returning to Fiji, with stops in Rotuma, returning to Tuvalu, Vanuatu, the Solomon Islands, Papua New Guinea, and finally, after so many years, Australia, with a high probability of returning to Palau and Micronesia. Wow. So first things first, what is the projected budget for this whole trip? Well, the aim and the goal is to save at least $15,000. I mean, to be quite honest, the Pacific Islands are not cheap as far as traveling to. Flights and getting around the Pacific Islands is the most expensive expense in this whole trip. I calculated with just flights alone, it's going to cost me about $4,500 to $5,000. But after that, as far as experience from my 2018 Pacific Island trip, after the flights, travel becomes very flexible, as food is fairly inexpensive depending on which island you go to.
Yeah, and Danny, good exercise.
There's intertransportation like costs for ferries or boats or even buses. Accommodation will more than likely be covered by my host family or people I stay with, but that doesn't mean I plan to come empty-handed, which means I have to add the expense of bringing gifts or even simply providing finances for the place I stay, which I have done before. To be quite honest and transparent, by the time I intend to leave Hawaii and set off on this trip, I have projected my savings to reach about $12,000, which leaves me with a slight disadvantage, but I'm still gonna go. People have asked me, how long are you going to be traveling for? Well, like all of my travels where I do go off one way, there is no time limit. What it really comes down to is how far I stretch my budget, how far my money goes. The intention is to spend as much time in each place, to truly immerse myself as I have in my previous travel. The more time I spend in a place, the more I can observe, learn, listen, become a part of the destination, which is wholeheartedly what I intend to do with everywhere I go. The point of my travels is to immerse myself so much that I become part of the place. So at the end of the trip, I have all the resources to respectfully share about the culture in a way that gives back to the culture, and also in a way that educates the outside world about what's real about the place. What are my obstacles? Yeah, they're quite a bunch. The first thing is actually the next step prior to my travels. I've been living in Hawaii for the past 4 years, going on 5. And the thing that I'm facing right now is, do I stay here or do I move? It's quite obvious to say that Hawaii is one of the most expensive places to live in the United States. I work 3 jobs, trying to survive and also try to save for travel. So it comes down to the reality of, how am I supposed to maintain a budget while traveling? I'll also try to afford keeping my place and my car here. To be completely honest, I can barely even afford to be here and I'm not traveling. So it comes to a point where it's just really not practical to stay here. It sucks because I absolutely love living in Hawaii. I love immersing in the culture and it does feel at home here. But I have many times had to question the practicality of living here. I definitely will be taking time making a vlog on reasons why I more than likely will move from Hawaii. But the decision to stay or go is more than likely leaning towards going. The second biggest thing during the trip is being able to maintain my budget throughout my trip. 16, 17, 25, 26, 27. There are about 30 plus stops on this entire trip for a time span that looks to be about 6 months to a year. So let's just say that there are concerns about how well I'm able to maintain a budget throughout this trip. Again, flights are very expensive. And in my 2018 trip, flights cut at my expenses really fast. I definitely know how to do this. I've been doing this for years, and I've done it once in the Pacific, but I definitely have to be real with myself. Maintaining a budget is a worry. I think the single most vital and important thing I have to consider, and I pray and hope for, is being able to sustain myself with some kind of passive income. I know holding on to a thin rope with YouTube is quite the stretch, but I've seen a lot of beautiful growth on my channel, and I know it's kind of a stretch to say that I have a lot of good quality content that looks to be a good way to sustain myself through YouTube. And while I don't do YouTube for money, there's still a great chance and opportunity to be able to sustain myself through YouTube, through my trip, through the content I plan to post prior to this trip, as well as the projects I plan to upload during this trip, that I may be able to sustain myself. Again, I know it's a stretch, but it's something I'm actually really counting on. Because again, the thing that's most important to me when I travel is being able to spend that intimate time in that place, to become so immersed that I become the place. And then when it comes to a point of sharing, I was able to have that time. To be completely honest, and this is not really complaining, but a lot of my previous travels, I've had the pleasure of going to places, but the one thing that I've always worried about was money. And I know that's a reality, to worry about money, but I don't want that to be a worry anymore, where it takes away from the quality experiences I have with connecting with people. For the first time in 10 years as a content creator, I can finally see what true value I can offer the world, but mostly to the people of the destination, especially culture and indigenous people. I want to acknowledge and reference my recent video, Living Like a Palauan. It definitely was the first of its kind in beginning a journey as an immersive traveler that's giving wholeheartedly to the people. It was an emotional video, but is the literal framework of a story I want to tell across the Pacific and beyond. Most cultures are rooted in storytelling. A storyteller is who I am. This trip is literally 6 years in the making. I traveled across the states with intentions to travel across the Pacific Islands, and the intended planned trip is literally the trip I'm replanning now. But of course, on my first island, I ruptured my Achilles tendon.
I stepped wrong. I think I hurt something on my foot.
Fast forward 3 years later, and I had intended on going on this trip, but of course you already know what happened in 2020. The story doesn't end there. I got stuck in Hawai'i during the course of the pandemic. I went through severe lockdowns. It was a really stressful time. But in that time, it was like a forced means to ground myself in Hawai'i, to really dive in, immerse, and learn about Hawaiian culture that I would have never done had the pandemic never happened. And what that would introduce me to are deep, humble qualities that have enhanced me as a person, that would allow me to be more ready than I ever could have anticipated for this trip this year. Literally having an experience in this trip at its fullest potential. And I think it doesn't end there, it goes beyond around the world. So let's talk about Micronesia for a second. Now, I honestly was not going to mention or announce anything about Micronesia, as there's a 50-50% chance of this even happening. Although there are so many moving parts, variables, and obstacles in this planned trip from Samoa to Australia, I do have to acknowledge and share my intended plans to return to Palau, as there's still so many things I want to experience in Palau. And that's without to say that Palau is one of my favorite places. But returning to Palau also opens the door to an entire Micronesia trip. I mean, the more I travel Micronesia, the more I fall in love with the people and its culture and its tradition and its way of life. A culture often misrepresented, underappreciated, and misunderstood. The more I learn about the diverse Micronesian cultures, the more I want to go back, immerse, and understand the people and the culture better, to share how beautiful and bright their culture is. And to be honest, the more I research about this trip, the more I look forward to it. But the only reason why I'm making mention of it is because if anything were to change tomorrow and I had no worries about any of my obstacles, it's very much a plan that I intend to move forward on. Okay, Oof, I went off on a tangent. There are definitely a lot more details about that particular trip, but I definitely want to talk about that more down the line. The closer that potential trip comes, and the more I can elaborate on everything. Taking things down to a humble level, I do plan on going home. Where is home? New York, South Carolina, and Belize. This trip that I take, unlike the trips I've taken in the past where I projected to be gone for a certain amount of time, ended up being that I was in one part of the world for way longer than I planned. Of course, spending time with family, having their blessing before I go travel the world is something that's vital to me. But in that time, I do have the blessing to be able to kind of take a step back from consistent 9-to-5 work to be able to give Palau, Hawaii, and Marshall Islands content that I'm working on, the TLC and time to put together. Along the way, I will be posting vlogs of why I'm going to each place, as well as returning to some places like Fiji, Tuvalu. Places I'm going to not only elaborate deep intent, but to try to further connect with the people there before I go. Whether it's on YouTube, Instagram, or TikTok. Connecting with the community as an immersive traveler. Of course you see why that's so important. Whew, yeah, that's quite the mouthful. I do firmly believe that everything will fall into place. I have an open mind to learn, observe, immerse, and share in a way that I never would have been prepared for back in 2017 and 2020. I've honestly never been more grounded, rooted, and confident as a content creator like I do now. I have never been more ready to take on travel and a trip like this like I do now. As I mentioned before, I do not do this for money, but that's without to say the cost of travel, gear, licensing, subscriptions, they're not cheap. So with that being said, if you would like to support me, definitely consider being a patron on Patreon. There are different tier memberships where you can help fund my travel. If you just want to do a one-time donation, consider using the super thanks feature within the YouTube video. Another way to drop a one-time donation, support me, is a site called Ko-Fi. I'll leave the link below. Everything counts and helps support me continue doing what I do and sharing what I share. I appreciate all of you out there for your love and support. Everybody has followed me since day one, and I definitely want to acknowledge all the people who have joined me in the past 2 months in this rapid growth of my channel. This voyage I'm about to embark on is going to be life-changing in every way. I can feel it, and I'm so happy to have you all join me to not only see the world, but see the real world. Real people, real culture, real places, real travel. That's what I'm all about. Stay tuned.